to my channel. Thanks for joining. So tonight's case is the Ed Gein case. Now obviously it's out on Netflix at the moment. If you haven't already watched it, you might have heard some stories about it, to how gruesome it is. So what I've decided to do is do the backstory of Ed Gein to give you an idea. So Ed was a body snatcher, a grave robber and a murderer, alright, and his gruesome crimes came to light in 1957 in November. Now, he was born in La Crosse in Wisconsin. He had an abusive father, George, who was an alcoholic, and he had a mother who was very controlling, very religious, and her name was Augusta. Now, when Ed was 8 years old, Augusta, his mother, decided that where they lived, she didn't want to bring her children up there. She wanted better for them. So they moved to Plainfield, where they lived in a rural farm about 6 miles outside Plainfield. Now, this area, Plainfield, didn't offer much. There wasn't much there, but they preferred the rural lifestyle. So at this point, it was George, his father, Augusta, his mother, and he also had a brother called Henry, and they all lived in this rural farm. And basically their dad was a alcoholic, so he had a very, very hard life, but his mum was very, very religious and very strict. So when they moved there, she wasn't very keen on them having friends. When they did have friends, eventually that she put a stop to it. So it made them very socially awkward, where they never had much of society around about them growing up. Got older. In 1940, his father George passed away. So that left his mum, his brother and him. Now, one thing the locals did say was he was a very good handyman. He was very helpful and very, very pleasant. They did say he came across as simple-minded, possibly classed as an oddball, but he worked very, very hard in the farm, but he would work more in isolated jobs and things like that. Now, when he lost his dad, he would show a lot of resentment for his brother Henry, because his mother was very controlling and, like we said, very religious. But once the father died, Henry kind of got away from that a little bit. And I don't think Ed was very happy at that, so he became very resentful to his brother Henry, and he really wanted his mum his cell. I think that Ed was resentful of Henry for speaking the way that he was, because apparently Henry was starting to speak out about his mum and not speaking nice words. In May 1944, there was a bushfire, and Henry and Ed were both fighting it, and they got separated. Ed ran for help because he didn't know where Henry was, but when he brought the people back, he took them straight to Henry, even though he didn't know where he was. When they went back, Henry had a head injury, and it was said that he took a heart attack while he was fighting the fire, but he'd maybe fell back and been hit with a rock. Now, at this time, there was nothing suspicious because the autopsy came back as that. But obviously now, looking at the bigger picture, and this was before 1957, I truly believe that Ed Gein took his brother's life as well. Augusta ended up having a stroke off the shock of finding out that her son Henry had passed away. And at that point, Ed had to care for his mum. And it was said that he was caring for her more ways than one. He was getting into bed with her, he was cuddling her. He was very, again, keeping her isolated, just how she had kept him isolated at that time. And in 1945, in December, his mother passed away, and he was apparently devastated. Now, he was 39 at that point. He had the farmhouse, so he'd went to that rural farm with his dad, his mum and his brother, and he was now left on his own. Now, bearing in mind, the locals had already said he was very, very simple-minded. Now, after Ed lost his mum, he would visit the graveyard very often, and the people that worked at the graveyard said that he would stop every time and be very pleasant, and maybe even crack a joke sometimes. They said he was the most unlikely character that they would have expected to be doing anything like that, but they did say he was very loyal to visiting his mum's grave. Now, also in this time, Ed had let the farmhouse go, as in it was cluttered. Rather than going to the dump to take things to the dump, he was going to the dump and bringing things back. And the house was just building up and building up. But it was said that he had boarded certain parts of the house off to preserve it how his mother left it. Remember, 1957, it was the first day of deer hunting. So basically, everybody in Plainfield, especially men, were all out deer hunting. And Ed had decided to go to the hardware shop, and it was Beatrice Watkins family that owned it, and he took a liking to her, but she'd rejected him on many occasions. A lot said that maybe she reminded him of his mum. And on that day of the very first day deer hunting, he went in and he asked her, could he see a rifle? And she walked towards the front of the shop to get the rifle, and he came behind her and he shot her in the head. He took her body straight back to his farm house, but it took for hours and hours for the locals to realise that she was missing because everyone had been out of town doing the deer hunting. Now, her son raised alarm because when he went in, he realised she wasn't in the shop, but there was also a trail of blood, and he said straight away he thought it was Ed Gein because he'd been such an annoyance leading up to that. The police then went straight to find Ed Gein, but he was at a neighbour's house having dinner, so while they went and got him, they went to his house, not expecting to find what they found. Now, it was basically said 2 years after his mother's death, he started stealing body parts, robbing graves, but not for the things you would expect. Jewellery, monetary, things that he would get something out of. He was looking for more different body parts. And what he would do is he would look in the local newspaper at the death articles and the death announcements because it was easier to dig up bodies with soft soil. So he would keep an eye so that then he would know it would be easier to do it. Now, he told the police all this. The police didn't know this until he came forward and said that they'd done this. So as it stands, he's only murdered 2 people because they found a local girl when they went to his house in November 1957. They actually found a local girl that had been missing for 2 years at that point. So it said that he's only murdered 2 people. When it went to court, it didn't even go to trial because they said that he was insane, basically, that he wasn't fit to stand trial. And then that was in 21st of November 1957, but 11 years later, it was decided now he can stand trial because he had adapted well into jail living, effectively, and obviously he was looking for somebody to look after him because his mum had gave him that much structure, so he was obviously thriving in an environment like that. Now, there was no electricity in the property. The place was very, very cluttered. 2 policemen went in with a flashlight, and as they went in, they looked up and they thought that it had been some sort of animal that had been gutted. And it turned out it was actually Beatrice, the lady who had been in the shop, and she'd been hung by her heels and absolutely gutted. Little did they know they were only starting to stumble on something much bigger. In the end, they found a lampshade made out of skin, 12 heads, gloves with fingers, jars with noses in it, female genitalia in it, female nipples made out of belt, human lips. He was pretending, basically, he made a skin suit and he used one of the heads and he was pretending he'd go out in the garden and put it on. He later admitted this, that he'd get in the garden and put that on, to try and bring his mum back. He was obviously arrested straight away, and like I said, the locals were completely shocked because they did not expect him to be like that. Now, he was found guilty, but he was for the 2 murders, but he was also put back into the hospital that he came from. Now, there's a psychologist that had actually said she'd interviewed him, she'd spent a lot of time with him, and she said that in the jail he was not a bit of a problem, there was no problematic behaviour. He was very, very calm the whole time, and it was like he'd always been looking for structure. 1984, he died, aged 77, of lung cancer. I do think he's very much responsible for a lot more deaths than 2, because also he had 12 heads, but there were only 11 crimes. So there was always one unaccounted for, and it seems to be an ongoing argument to how many it actually was. But off the back of that, there has been books that's been based on him, crime memorabilia. People have tried to, so the car that he transported the bodies in ended up going up for auction, and it went for $700. The house was going up for auctions. The locals were not happy about it because it was going to get turned into a museum. So a few days before the auction, the house burnt down. And the locals said even a year past that, there still had people coming to visit. But they also said that the memorabilia people were taking and trying to keep, but they charged, like for the car, $700. They were also charging for photos, etc. It was also the films that he inspired for Norman Bates, he actually compares himself in to Ed Gein's and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Silence of the Lambs as well. Before those crimes took place, it was all about your horror films, monsters, things like that. But after that crime took place, a lot of horror films in America were based around that. And also another wee fact, he was buried back with his mum at the graveyard that he stole the bodies from, that he went to visit. And his gravestone keeps becoming memorabilia. From the year 2000, people keep taking the gravestone and they had to keep replacing it. They've replaced it 3 times. Crazy, absolutely crazy. But that is the case of Ed Gein. Obviously there is a Netflix. I have not watched the Netflix. I wanted to just do the facts of the case. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it gives you a backstory if it's not already in the Netflix already. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, comment, like, subscribe. It really helps. It means a lot. And I'll see you all again soon.